Good evening. Welcome, Comadres and Friends. I am Maria Ferrer, Executive Director of Las Comadres para las Américas and Las Comadres and Friends Book Club. The leadership team and I are pleased for you to join us tonight for our teleconference, which celebrates our 17th year. It has been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these years, and we look forward to many more years to come. We also want to extend a warm welcome to our readers following us on our live Twitter chat at Latino Lit. Tonight, we welcome authors Elizabeth Gonzalez James and Estella Gonzalez. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. If you want, you can keep your videos on, but please don't make too much movement because that's a little bit distracting. We suggest that you put yourselves on speaker mode, but gallery works just as well. If you have any questions, any comments, please put them on the chat. We will review them. We will try to get to them. We can't promise, but we will review them and see if we can get, share your question with our authors. Now, a little bit about our book club's history. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York City. After a brief hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started these teleconferences in October 2006. We are in our 16th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and the book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about our Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club is open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a safe space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities. There is sure to be one that fits your schedule. And if your city doesn't have one, help us start a book club. For more information about our book club, please visit us at www.latinolit.com. Okay? Comadre Karen, take it away.
Welcome, Comadres and friends, to our September 2024 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first interview is with Elizabeth Gonzalez James, the author of the novel Mona at Sea, as well as the chapbook 5 Conversations about Peter Sellers and The Bullet Swallower. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Idaho Review, Southern Humanities Review, The Rumpus, Story South, Pank, P-A-N-K, and elsewhere, and have received numerous Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominations. Originally from South Texas, Elizabeth now lives with her family in Massachusetts. Interviewing Elizabeth is Tess Tobin, Project Manager for Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. Tess is a former president of Reforma and has been a proud member of the book club since 2007, and she enjoys promoting the work of Latino authors. Comadre Tess, take it away.
Okay, good evening, Elizabeth. How are you? So happy to have you here.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Many of us have read the book, but for those who will, can you just give us a brief synopsis of The Bullet Swallower?
Yeah, it's a magical realism Western that is based on the true story of my great-grandfather, who was a bandido in the late 1800s. He was chased down by the Texas Rangers and shot in the face, but he lived. And so I sort of took that little nugget of a truthful story and I expanded it into a full novel, and I kind of go backwards and forwards in time. I have the perspective of my main character, Antonio, who's our bandito, and then I have a secondary protagonist named Jaime, who's Antonio's grandson. And the novel asks a question which I think is like one of the most pressing questions of life in the 21st century, which is, can we be better than the people who came before us? So yeah, that's what it's about.
Right. Yeah, I loved it. It was very interesting the way you put it together. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't really find out until I read the acknowledgments that I like to call him Tragabalas. I like the way that sounds. I didn't realize that he is your great grandfather. So the readers here, we're just curious to know, and you also grew up in South Texas. Did this personal history impact you telling the story?
Yeah, I didn't, so I never got to meet him, unfortunately. He died before I was born, and his son, my grandfather, also died before I was born. So I never got to meet anybody that would have been like personally involved in the story. And I also wish I could say that the story of the legend of my great grandfather was this like cherished family legend, but my dad is just not nostalgic in that way. So it was like a story that I heard a few times. And at some point when I had been writing for a while, I was like, oh my God, this story is insane. I have to turn this into something. And yeah, so I had to do a ton of research because it's historical fiction. And I put in my author's note, I kind of joke, I wrote a magical realism Western despite knowing nothing about magical realism Westerns, guns, cowboys, life along the border in 1895. Like I knew nothing. So I had to do a ton of research, and a lot of what made it into the novel was based on my very copious amount of research.
Right, right. Like you said, the book takes place in two time periods back in the 1890s with Antonio El Tragabalas, and then it moves to the 1960s with his grandson and son, Jaime and Juan Antonio. It does appear like you've done a lot of research on this, and you really bring forth the idea of colonialism and racism, and especially your portrayal of the Texas Rangers. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you went about researching it and then how it all came together?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of reading into the Texas Rangers, and I was really hoping actually that I would find somewhere some account of them shooting my great grandfather in the face, but I never found anything in the Texas Rangers history about him. What I did find, however, there was a Texas folklorist named Jovita Gonzalez, no relation to me, but she grew up in Roma, Texas, which is where my family is from. It's right on the border, across the river from Ciudad Miguel Alemán. And she actually heard the story of my great grandfather and turned it into a short story. And I was able to find that. So that was a great piece of source material. And then the other thing that actually had a huge impact on the book, and I didn't know this when I set out to start writing it, but it sort of evolved. I started writing the rough draft of the novel in 2016, the fall of 2016. And after the election, after Donald Trump was elected, you know, he got elected largely on a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, and had really shifted the focus of the nation on the Texas-Mexico border. And I had originally conceived of this book as just being like a swashbuckling, like, you know, rootin' tootin' revenge story. And then once all this was happening, I was like, I can't talk about the border without talking about the history of racially motivated violence that that occurred, and continues to occur if we're being honest. But yeah, I had to very much broaden the scope of the book and talk about racism, talk about colonialism, talk about all of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's really a lot of detail, but it brings the reader along with that time period. So I thought it was great writing. Um, what about your character, El Tragabalas? How did you develop him? You know, he's got so much going on. I kind of felt sorry for him in a way. I don't think he was really violent. I think it was a matter of the circumstances of being so poor that he went off. So, what were your thoughts when you were creating this character?
I had a really hard time getting into his character. It took me 3 years to get a rough draft, and I was still getting to know the character, you know, all the way up until like the last revision of the book before it went to print. And it was so hard for me to get to know him because just our circumstances are so dissimilar. Like, I've never fired a gun. My characters are constantly shooting each other, but I've never fired a gun. I've never, like, I'm not violent. I've never even gotten in a fight. And you know, this is a man who solves every problem he comes across with violence. And so I had to read books about people who kill for a living, basically. So either criminals or soldiers, and like what that does to a person, what violence does to who you are, and how it like contorts your soul, and also like how you can justify it in a lot of ways, and how you can live with yourself. And yeah, it was a lot of research and reading, and a lot of like going into weird, dark, unsavory corners of Reddit, which I really would not recommend that anybody ever do.
Oh yeah. Um, one of the participants here said, talk a little bit about how you wrote about the environment. Did you visit any of these places, or it was all in your research?
Yeah, so I grew up in Laredo, Texas, and then when I was 10, we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas, which is still where my parents live, and my brother and his wife. So I do know the landscape of South Texas pretty well from my memory, but yeah, I did also I did a little bit of traveling. Um, I drove in 2019. I still have a lot of family in Laredo, so I went over to Laredo, and then we went down Highway 83 that hugs the border, and we visited Fronton, Texas, and Roma, Texas, and McAllen, and all the way down to South Padre. And it's a really beautiful landscape. It's funny, I was just in Laredo a week and a half ago for a funeral, and I was driving in at sunset, and it's very green right now because they've been getting a lot of rain, and just like the green desert plants and the like red, purple, orange, yellow sunset, it just took my breath away. And I'm kind of mean about the South Texas landscape in the book because it is also just like literal hell. It's like hot and unrelenting, and there's no water, and there's snakes and scorpions everywhere, and cactuses. But if you catch it, sometimes it's just so beautiful. So yeah, it was a little bit of firsthand experience, and then just like personifying, I think. I took what existed and then just made it a little bit extra.
Very nice, very nicely done. So you include in this story a fictitious book, The Ignominious History of the Sonoro Family. It's written by a fictional historian, and I think I think it keeps the action going in the story. How did you come about developing this book itself, which helped promote, you know, bring us from the past to the future?
Yeah, I felt that in a little bit of a way I needed to explain I needed to explain the history of this family. So I have this the way that the grandson of El Tragabalas comes into the story is that this woman comes to his house and she has this enormous, like moldy old history book from the 1700s. And she says, "This is about your family. This book is cursed. I don't want it. You deal with it." The book was great because I got to explain a little bit of the history of the family. I got to also explain a little bit about the history of Latin America, because like not everybody knows the story of the conquest. And I mean, I would hope that most people do, but I don't know what people know. I'm a huge history buff. And so I also got to kind of load up my fictitious family with basically like every evil thing that you can imagine one family doing, going back to the time of Cain and Abel. I can't remember what actually made it into the final draft of the book, but like I had all kinds of like messed up crimes from like medieval Europe, like poisoning an entire village so that he could so that this guy could like flatten a town so he could get a better view. Just stuff that probably actually did happen at some point in history, because people are very inventive when they're trying to think of ways to do bad things. Yeah, so that was pretty much it. And then the other fun thing about that fictitious book was the woman who's writing it, the historian, she starts out trying to tell just this historical narrative, but then as she gets deeper into the book and as we as readers get deeper into the book, she starts to tip her hand a little bit and she slips into the first person point of view. And that was a lot of fun to write because I was able to sort of use her a little bit as a proxy for me. At one point she kind of apologizes and she's like, the story I wanted to tell was so much bigger than what I was actually able to get onto the page. And at some point my editor was like, "Well, Elizabeth, people are going to think that that's you." And I was like, "It is me." I really wanted to tell like a way bigger, crazier story, but just this is what I could do at this time. So yeah.
That's good. Very creative. Good. Why does Juan Antonio not want to talk about his family? I know, he was separated and he lived with his aunt and, maybe there was some trauma there, but can you tell us why you chose for him not to want to talk about his family?
I think he understood that they were cursed. And I think that he was hoping that by keeping that information from his son, that maybe the curse wouldn't follow him and more importantly, wouldn't follow his son. And I think also there are so many generations. Certainly, my dad was born in 1941, and certainly his generation, they don't want to talk about the bad things. They have no interest in it. I think like that's why they're called the silent generation. They just keep it inside and you can't, wild horses can't drag some of that stuff out of them. That's like why you have the stereotype of like the only time that men will open up is like when they're really drunk and listening to like Vicente Fernandez or something like that, right? Yeah.
So do you think it's a fear or why don't they want to talk about it? It's too personal or it would open up too many doors, or I'm just curious how you feel about it.
I think it's what you said. I think it's a fear of just opening up too many doors, a fear of being vulnerable, a fear of feeling like they might cry, which would be death to so many men. And I think there's so much trauma that happened or that still happens, but there was so much trauma that happened to a lot of men, I think in my dad's generation when they were kids, and they didn't they didn't have like the therapeutic language that we have now. And so I'm sure there's a lot of like internalized blame too, like, well, this happened to me because I was bad or whatever. So I think that's a lot of it too. I'm not a psychologist, but that's my opinion.
Very good. So we have Remedio. How did you come about creating Remedio, and how come he reappears in the 1960s?
Yeah, Remedio is so he's a supernatural character. He's sort of like a soul collector. I don't come outright and say he's the devil, but he performs functions that I would believe that the devil performs if we accept that the devil exists. So he takes bad people to the place where they are going. That's Remedio's prime function. And the story kicks off when, at the very beginning of the book, he refuses to take one character to where they are supposed to go. And yeah, I think that it's funny, I'm trying to remember. He comes back in the 1960s because that's his job. His job is to collect payment from this family for all the terrible things that they've done. And you know, whoever he's working for, if it's God or you know, whatever, it has been decreed that this family is going to pay, and they're going to pay by a certain quantity of souls are going to go to hell. And so if he doesn't take Antonio, then he's got to take somebody else. There's got to be fulfillment of the numbers. So yeah.
So do you think that the new generations are still paying back this debt?
I think that it was satisfied at the end. I mean, I don't, hopefully people have read the book, but yeah, I believe, yeah, the curse has been broken by the end of the book.
I have a few more questions, but I don't know if you wanted to read a short excerpt or something, if you wanted to have our listeners hear your prose. I love the shootout in the rain. I don't know, for some reason it was just, I don't know. I like that part of the book. But anyway, if you have a minute or if you want to, it's up to you.
Yeah, sure. I just have to, I was trying to, I'm on, I'm like in our attic sort of, and my book is downstairs. Let me pull up a copy on my computer because that's where I have it.
Okay.
I was trying to find it on my phone. I thought I had a copy in my phone, but I do not. Okay, I'm just going to read from the very beginning, the prologue. So this is the first page of the book, Dorado, Mexico, early 1800s. Alferez Antonio Sonoro was born with gold in his eyes. The gold was sharp, and it stung him so that he blinked uncontrollably and always carried a vial of salted water in his pocket. Of the 4 Sonoro brothers, he was the only one thus signified, and his parents regarded it a blessing, incontestable proof of divine favor. Though he was the youngest, the servants carved his portion of meat first, even before his father's. His mother often knelt before him at night, delivering her prayers directly to her child rather than to God. The Sonoros lived in Dorado, a mining town established by their silk-clad forebears in the arid brushland fronting what the Texans called the Rio Grande, but which the Mexicans gave the more descriptive name Rio Bravo del Norte. A flock of clay-colored buildings studded with wooden vigas and decorated with dahlias drowsing in white pots. Dorado sat quiet and erect across the water from the wilds of the province of Texas, a 4-day journey upstream from where the river spooled emerald into the briny Gulf. Dorado, meaning golden, was both a wish and a command. The earth there was split apart by the Sonoros and her bounty revealed, and they took lustily.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I love the sound of it. Very good. I did hear that your book is being adapted to a film. That's wonderful. And how has that process been? Are you doing the screen play?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I am adapting it. And it's funny when you ask me like how did I come up with Antonio, and I said like up until the very end, I was still getting to know the character. I'm still getting to know the character as I'm adapting it, because things have to change like a little bit. Like these relationships have to be made a little clearer for film. So it's really challenging, but I'm really excited to get to work on it. The producers were very kind to give me a crack at it because I've never done this before. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm just gonna keep riding this train until they throw me off. So
It's a good way to look at it, right? Very good. Did your family react at all to the book? I know you said your father, doesn't like to talk about that, but did anybody else, did they like it or say you shouldn't have done it or anything like that?
I was expecting somebody to pop out at some point and give me some grief, but it really, I mean, touch wood, it really hasn't happened yet. My father, unfortunately, has had some health issues, so he hasn't been able to read it. But I did have a lot of my cousins from Laredo read it and were super excited about it. I think they were just really thought it was super cool that like our great grandfather got to, show up in a book and everything. And everybody in the family knew the same story. So no, it's been really, really positive. I haven't gotten any grief about it yet, so that's good. I mean, it's mostly fiction. And so I can also just, hide behind that too. If anybody's like, why did you do this? I could say like, I just made it up. It's not true.
Right, you have that option with the being fiction, right? Um, uh, we have a lot of people in Las Comadres, aspiring writers, and I'm sure there's people on the teleconference. Talk a little bit about your creative process and how you go about writing.
Yeah, I've been writing fiction for 14 years now. And I love it. It's the coolest job ever. It's the most frustrating job ever. Um, and but it's great. I get so excited to chase after these shiny new ideas. I'm like a magpie, like, oh, that looks fun. I'm gonna go run after that. Um, and yeah, so my writing process is I try to write. I This last month has been a complete mess because I had pneumonia and then I had a funeral in the family and I was traveling, but when I don't have pneumonia and like family drama, the my ideal is to write Monday through Friday. I try to treat it like a job. In the mornings, I do chores and exercise and answer emails. And then after lunch, like 12:30, I try to write until 5 p.m. But life has been getting in the way a lot lately, so I really haven't stuck to that schedule in a while. But one day I hope that I will be able to get back to that. And yeah, if there's any aspiring writers out there, the best way to get better at writing is just reading and writing a ton. They're both really, really important. And yeah, read widely, like read well out of your comfort zone. Stuff that people who you really admire, who you think are really smart, read whatever book they recommend. That's a great way to get clued into some really incredible writers.
Very good. Well, we can end with, are you working on anything now? I mean, I know you're busy with the movie, but are you writing a new novel or have an idea for one?
I am, yeah. So I originally the Bullet Swallower was over 500 pages. The character of the grandson had a lot of other adventures that just didn't make it to the final book. And there was one little tiny nugget of a story about him cheating on his wife. And I took that and I'm turning it into a standalone novel. So it's not a sequel at all, but it does take place in Mexico City in the 1960s. And it's called Letter to My Husband's Mistress. It's written from the perspective of the wife who is being cheated on. And it's a lot more sex, a lot less killing. I can't guarantee there's zero killing, but it's been a nice change of pace. And this is a character that's much easier for me to understand than a violent bandido. So it's been good.
Very good. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I thank you for writing The Bullet Swallower. I know I enjoyed it, and I'm sure many of my comadres have. And thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you so much, everybody, for having me. This was really fun.
You're welcome. Okay, Karen.
Gracias, comadres. Our second interview is with Estella Gonzalez, the author of an acclaimed story collection, Chola Salvation, and the novel HUIZACHE Women. Her work has been widely anthologized, including in A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories, and Latinos in Lotus Land, an anthology of contemporary Southern California literature. She received Cornell University's Philip Fruin Prize in Creative Writing, a Pushcart Prize, special mention, and a reading notable for the Best American Non-Required Reading. She received her BA in English from Northwestern University and her MFA in fiction from Cornell University. She now lives in Tucson, Arizona. Interviewing Estella is Comadre Sheila Perez Quindo. Comadre Sheila is a Chicana of indigenous Mexican and Chinese ancestry. She is a former pediatric animal assisted and recreational therapist working for 33 years in a large safety net hospital. Sheila currently serves as a discussion leader for the Denver Las Comadres Network, interviewing several authors and reviews books for Las Comadres National Book Club. Sheila is an aspiring writer and raised in Denver, Colorado. She is married and has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. She is vice president of the Auraria Historical Advocacy Council and a member of Mile High Veterans, both of which provide educational scholarships to community youth and displaced Aurarian families. Take it away, Comadre Sheila.
You're on mute. Still.
All right, thank
There
you.
go.
Hi, Estella.
I turn on the lights. Hi, I'm here in the library and the lights go on and off. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here with us today. We're so excited to talk to you about HUIZACHE Women. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself, Estella. I know that you have a lot of things going on, so tell us about you.
Oh, well, I'm basically, like you mentioned, I went to school at Cornell. That's where I got my MFA, and I'm currently writing another novel too. So I'm busy with my writing. I also volunteer for, the Tucson Festival of Books and the Southwest Book of the Year. So we constantly reading poetry and other works. I recently taught at the University of Arizona for the summer. I had the privilege of teaching a creative writing course, and that was a blast. So I have so many things going. Right now I'm in Los Angeles visiting my family, but also I had a chance to speak at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes with 2 other writers about our work. So in October, I'm going to be traveling to Texas and other places promoting my book. So been busy. It's a lot of travel.
Right. Well, let us know if you come to Denver.
I was in Denver visiting family for a little bit.
You missed
But I'll
it.
let you know if I come back again.
Okay. All right. Would you give us a brief overview of HUIZACHE Women?
Well, it's the short version is that it's about a woman who falls in love and wreaks havoc on everybody, including her daughters. The long version is it's a saga about Merced Fierro and her daughters and her granddaughter. It's told from their various points of view as they try to overcome, various hardships, including racism, poverty, misogyny, and they try to find meaning in their lives through education, community, and family.
Yeah. The book covers a lot of different topics: incest, prostitution, abortion, survival, like you mentioned, poverty, misogyny. Those are just things that are difficult sometimes to talk about. So I think that the book was very well written and brings us to some ideas that sometimes people don't want to discuss. And I think that's an important part of writing, is allowing people to express themselves in different ways. When did you begin this work?
I started at Cornell, actually. It started off as the first chapter was going to be Angry Blood. And this was at about 2006. So it took me a while to finish. And, after I graduated, I went back to LA and, I started adjuncting and other things happened. My brother and my sister both were diagnosed with cancer. And so I was helping my family with that. And unfortunately, my brother did not survive. So there was a period of grief too. So I put off the novel for a while, but I still kept writing. I wrote other stories. I was part of various writing groups, like the Pasadena Writing Project, Las Guayabas, which included, Miriam Gurba and Tatiana de la Tierra and Caribbean Fragosa, who, have published books. So I kept writing, but once I published my collection of short stories, it was during the pandemic with Arte Publico, I mentioned that I did have a novel and the publishers were interested in it. So it lit a fire under me, and I'm like, oh shoot, I got to finish this book now. So that's, I finally finished it in 2022 and it came out in 2023. So it took me a while. And I think I also did a lot of research. I went down to Mexico to Chihuahua, actually, with my mom and my aunt, because the main character, Merced Fierro, is inspired by my maternal grandmother. She was not your typical abuelita, as I like to say. She hung out, or she actually used to work at bars. And she worked, she didn't stay home, like it was typical of Mexican and even 50s wives, because pretty much she was in El Paso in the 40s and 50s. So, she was working and hustling.
Wow, that's interesting. Would you speak to some of the traumatic experiences that Merced and Teofilas and the daughters had? Can you speak to those traumatic experiences?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of, the violence that happens, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, I think is a form of, I think is an expression of the poverty that they are enduring. And it traumatizes everybody, including the men who, who visit this violence on family members. It's terrible. It's something that I saw when I was growing up too. And you wonder, it's like, why do people do this to each other? Why do men, abuse their wives? Or their children? Or why do women abuse their own children too? And I think, it's a lot of it is, I don't know, frustration with their circumstances, the poverty, trying to survive, the everyday, stress and I don't know, desperation. So I think in a way I was trying to understand that. It's like, why would a father do this to his own daughter? Why is Merced, so cruel to, Alma? And I think it was, it's like, she is so angry. She really doesn't know how to express this anger and frustration that she had to grow up with. Therapy, was not a thing. I think it's still stigmatized within, certain, working class Chicano, Mexicano communities too. So I think I was trying to understand that and trying to help maybe the reader understand that too.
So it sounds like it was cathartic and that you were able to kind of free yourself from some of that, perhaps.
Right. Right. It is cathartic to explore at a distance because it is fictionalized. It's like, huh, I mean, you have sort of have to take a clinical stance, you know, even though it is horrible.
Was it difficult to write about the trauma these women experienced?
You know, yeah. I mean, it's hard. You know, sometimes as a writer, when you're writing scenes like that, and you're doing this to your characters, and you come out of it, you know, because I mean, I describe it as like being in a sort of trance, you know, writing something like this. Um, and you come out of it and you're like, wow, this is horrible. And and again, you know, when you write something like that, I think I think I just wanted to, okay, this happened to Merced. Let's see what are the effects of this. And so you move on from that. I mean, that becomes one of the starting points. I think because that are actually at the start of the novel, you know, you see the incest, and that pushes her, you know, to change or want something different from her life too. She also sees a movie with Lupita Tovar, and and she can see that life can be different. Although that movie technically is about a prostitute in Mexico City, but it's so like romanticized. Merced, you know, doesn't see the horror. She just sees the beauty of the life that Lupita has.
Right. That movie was mentioned in our book club, and I thought about that, and I saw a little part of the movie, and understood that the young lady was um, seduced and then left by a soldier, and how I thought how it kind of like was part of your book as well, or how Merced goes through and being with Leandro, and I'm thinking about how that kind of just was part of the movie itself, and it was kind of hard to see that she just took that and went that direction too.
Yes, yes.
In your perception, is abuse learned through circumstances?
It could be, I think, but it can also be unlearned, I think. And we see that with her daughters, because even Alma, who is, you know, sexually, you know, basically abused, and exploited, she doesn't do that to her own daughter. And neither do, I mean, Suki doesn't do that either. I mean, although she doesn't really experience a whole lot of the trauma, she sees it. Norma, I think also, I mean, I think she mostly punishes herself, but she doesn't inflict it on others. I don't think Norma, I think, remains, you know, sort of in the same state that she, you know, is from the beginning. I mean, she kind of develops more, but I think Alma and Suki are the ones who really like decide, I'm not going to be abusive. I'm going to actually heal. And Suki, especially, she becomes a healer for her community, right? By opening up the Botanica, the La Malinche, which I purposely, I mean, that's another name too for another woman who was severely abused and blamed, right, for Mexico's or the Aztecs' defeat. But I mean, there were other circumstances surrounding that. But anyway, I think and Lucha ultimately too. I mean, even though she says she can't forgive her grandmother, I mean, I think she does in a way by taking her back. You know?
Yeah, I felt that way too. I see that when we talk about Pina, their tia, and she sacrificed her own happiness to save Merced. Although the sacrifice didn't guarantee the happy ending. Tell me about that. Talk about that, please.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Pina was trying to save Merced. And I think that was also a way of showing, you know, sometimes what you see, you know, self-sacrificing, being a martyr in a way, you know, is it can be self-defeating. I mean, I think Pina would have been maybe, you know, maybe it would have been better for her to have married Leandro instead. But I mean, this was her way of trying her best. And sometimes that's what happens too. You know, people do their best to try to avoid or try to prevent more hurt from being inflicted on people, but sometimes it just backfires. But it doesn't end there though. It doesn't end there. And I think that's a redeeming feature. It's like, Lucha does leave, Leandro, and goes on to a different stage in her life. I mean, and maybe Merced doesn't really learn, but her daughters do. Her daughters see, all the heartbreak that Merced goes through and how it affects them also. And it's a trigger for them to say, you know what, this is enough. We're not gonna, this is obviously not helpful. Leandro was never helpful. And sometimes that happens, and that's okay, but it can still change. The trajectory of their lives does still change.
Right. That Leandro was such a scoundrel.
Yeah.
He was just such a, I don't know, it's hard for me to talk about him because I was so mad at him all the time. But which of the characters speak to you the most in this book?
I think Lucha does, and so does Suki. I think both of them do, because they actually, I think, are a force for change, for uplifting not just themselves, but the people around them. And I think that I love that. I mean, there's a positivity. Although, you know what, Merced does also speak to me too, because here is a woman. I mean, her circumstances are pretty bad, but she, decides to break away, and she does it the best that she can because she has no education. She's not rich or, conventionally beautiful. I mean, although she does get described as looking like Maria Felix, who was, one of the most beautiful women, I think, in Mexican cinema. But she wasn't blonde, she wasn't blue-eyed, which is, the conventional beauty, standard in, in Mexico. When I was growing up, that's like the blonde, that you want to be a güera, you don't want to be all dark, you don't want to be prieta like in India. So she had that, going against her, but her will, I mean, she is such a strong-willed person that she just breaks away. And for better or for worse, she drags along her daughters, and she doesn't stay stagnant. That's what I like about her. And especially during a time when women were supposed to be very docile and just do as they're told, because she's growing up during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And Mexican women were not encouraged to do that. And they really didn't do a whole lot like that. I mean, again, my own grandmother did that herself. She was married off young, but she was not in love with her husband. So she left him, which was unheard of. And she became the black sheep of her family.
Donaciano it felt like they did not recognize him at the funeral. Can you talk about him more? I know that he was abusive to Merced at the beginning of their relationship. I wonder if he would have been different to Pina if he had married her.
Yeah, I get the feeling that maybe not. He probably would have been, because he's the son, right? He's the one who there are a lot of expectations that are put upon him by his own mother, who wanted him to marry somebody else who is wealthy, but his own desires are also suppressed, just like the women's, right? He has to fit a certain mold because of societal expectations. And again, that I think angers and frustrates him too, because he has to lose the woman that he loves. And I think this violent, I mean, it's pretty violent when you get your own free will repressed. I think that does something to your soul, and it could come out, violently. And I think it was a lot of it is metaphorical in a way too. That physical violence is that inner violence, I think, that is expressed figuratively, and I think Donaciano I think he still would have been the same way with Pina, because his mother probably would have punished him in a different way too, maybe taken away their store, taken away his inheritance. and he would have been another frustrated soul.
At the end of the book, when Lucha is carrying the urn and she sees Pina, and Pina frowns at her, at Merced's urn. Talk about that a little bit.
I think Pina is disappointed in Merced and maybe in Lucha for bringing her back. And, you know, because, you know, ultimately Pina wanted, you know, Merced to be, you know, that wife for Don Asiano, because she gave up the man she loved. And, you know, Merced just couldn't, well, I mean, she was abused. So, but I think she blames Pina more for that than Don Asiano, because that's traditionally, or that's unfortunately what happens too. The woman is blamed for the man's actions. And maybe Pina cannot forgive Merced for that. But it's so, you know, that doesn't matter. You know, Merced is back home, and she, you know, she has her granddaughter with her who is hope for a better future.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's what matters the most, not that disapproval for breaking these societal standards that are constructs, right?
Yeah. There was some humor. I wanted to talk about the crawl space. Where was that? What house was that? Was that in El Paso?
No, that was in LA.
Oh, okay.
That's in East LA. So that's the house that Merced and Leandro bought when they first arrived in East LA. And you know, yeah, so she makes Lucha go down and try and find that, you know, the deed for the house. So, but yeah, I think we need some humor, because I know it's a pretty tough, there's a lot of tough scenes, but you know, but that's life too. You know, there's always some form of humor that we can find even in under the worst circumstances.
Yes, yes. We enjoyed the book, even though it was sometimes hard. But how long does it take to feel the validation of your work? Is it immediate, would you say, or talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I don't know if you mean by validation the satisfaction of finishing, or I think the validation, I mean, getting it published was a big form of validation for me. It's like, oh, they actually liked it. Yay. But I think hearing readers, especially women, say how they can see themselves in some of these characters like Lucha, or just, you know, knowing, going through like that, you know, bad romance, you know, as Lady Gaga would say. I mean, because we've all gone through it. I mean, not abusive, because, you know, Lucha has her own heartbreak too with Jorge / George. But yeah, no, I think, you know, I had a reader who actually was a student at Stanford, and she actually like used, you know, I think a chapter of mine. Well, actually that was for Chola Salvation. No, it was actually a professor, actually, I'm sorry, I'm gonna backtrack on that. It was a professor at a Spanish university who did a paper on the novel, and she said that Merced is a kind of like what would I say, a transgressive abuelita, a chicana, you know, because you don't really see that a lot in literature. Usually like the abuelitas are very sweet, and they support and nurture their families, and you know, this one is like, boom, she doesn't, you know, she doesn't really do that loving nurturing, but she's trying to survive, and she's trying in her own warped way, trying to help her daughters survive and teach them how to survive.
Right. Well, we really, really appreciate you being with us tonight, Estella. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and hopefully we'll see you soon. And thank you so much.
No, thank you. Mil gracias a ustedes and a las comadres. I think this was a pleasure and one of my lifelong dreams to be on Las Comadres. So thank you so much for the invitation. I was so thrilled when I received it.
Thanks
Thank you
again.
so much. To our authors and their publishers, Arte Publico Press, and Gallery Books for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. And thank you as well to our interviewers, Comadre Tess Tobin and Sheila Perez Kendall. You all are wonderful. I mean, you all really get into it and bring so much of the author out so that we can learn more about the books as you interview them. We also want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight. Oops, sorry, I lost my place. To join us tonight, and we'd like to thank all volunteers with whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen without the volunteers. And our audience, you all help us make it happen. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their work, their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers, as well as with other readers. Remember that. And buy books to support our authors. And if your library doesn't have a book that you want to read, ask them to order one. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. And remember that our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcomed. Our October books are Craft Stories I Wrote for the Devil by Ananda Lima and Chicano Frankenstein by Daniel A. Olivas. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. And please join us in celebrating our Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night, buenas noches, and always read Latino Lit.